This is Homeschool 101, a collaboration between ABS Television and the Ministry of Education. Stay attentive and attempt all activities. And now, today's lesson.
Hello students, welcome to another episode of ABS Homeschool 101. Today we are continuing your English lessons and we are looking at argumentative text or argumentative discourse. And in today's lesson, we will be interpreting and analyzing argumentative text so that you can do that successfully in the examination. Let us begin. I want you to look very carefully at the screen. Look at those two figures and answer the question for me. Think about it. What makes an argument an argument? We know that there are different types of discourse. We have narration, we have exposition, we have description, and we have argument or persuasion. Now, what makes an argument an argument? Think about that for a moment, and we will continue.
You're watching Homeschool 101.
Okay, so now that you have your answer firmly in your minds, let us look at what we want to accomplish today, our objectives. I have 5 objectives on the board for you. The first thing we're going to do is list different forms of argumentative text. Then we're going to explain the key features of argumentative text, explain how to identify the writer's purpose and the intended audience of a piece of writing. We're going to explain how to use the context that words and expressions appear in to determine the meanings of those words and expressions. And finally, we're going to focus on 2 strategies that will help you to interpret and analyze argumentative text. So, there are different forms of argumentative text, and the examination can feature any one of these forms. So we have advertisements, letters to the editor, review of books, films, etc. You have sports reports, text of speeches, persuasive essays, as well as newspaper and magazine articles. All of these forms are examples of argumentative text. But how would you know whether a piece of writing in one of these is argumentative or not? First of all, you have to determine whether that is indeed the writer's purpose. And if the text is argumentative, then the writer's purpose would be to argue a position. He has a claim or a stance, and he wants to give reasons why his position is true. So he argues a position, he provides reasons for a claim, he or she, mind you, and the writer may also wish to convince the reader or the listener, in the case of a spoken discourse, to buy a service or buy a product. Okay? So, you have these 3 elements that will tell you that the writer's purpose is to argue a position, to provide reasons for a claim, and to convince the audience to purchase a product or a service. So when you're reading your argumentative text, you have to read carefully to determine the writer's purpose. And if it falls into any one of these 3 categories, then you know that this is argumentative writing. Now, once you've determined that the writing is argumentative, the next step is to determine who the writer is writing for. That's the audience. The writer writes a piece, but he's directing it at a specific segment of society. Specific people are being targeted in the piece of writing. So you have to read carefully to determine who the intended audience is. That's a very common CSEC question. Now, what are some tips that would help you to do so? First, we have the details that are given. Those details would be things that would appeal to a particular category of people or a particular group of people in society. For instance, if the writer is giving examples and using details related to sports, then you know that he might be targeting sports enthusiasts. If he's talking, he or she is talking about things related to parents, then you know that the intended audience is parents. So you look at details, you look at illustrations and examples, you look at the people that are used in testimonials, and you also look at the anecdotes that are used in the piece and the language of the piece. If the language is technical, then you know definitely that the writer is not targeting people who are unfamiliar with the terms that are used. Okay, so the first thing is to know definitely that that piece of writing that you're reading is a piece of argument, and secondly, you need to determine who the intended audience is. Let's move on. Now, this is the crux of the matter. You might have determined that the writer's purpose is to argue a position or to convince the readers of a particular claim by giving reasons. You might have determined the audience. But how does the writer go about convincing you of his position? What he or she does, is make use of language devices and techniques of argument or persuasion. And sometimes those two words are used interchangeably. But really, argument depends on reasons particularly, whereas persuasion may have reasons as well as depend more on emotive appeals. So these two together combine to form the elements of persuasion. And we're going to look at these very, very carefully. But remember, this is a revision because you would have been doing this work throughout your fifth form years, and particularly over the last 2 years. So we're revising, and as we go through, if there's something that you're not very clear about, that means you have to return to your textbooks and do some personal study so that that concept can be concretized in your minds and you can be ready for your exam. The first thing we're going to look at is language devices used to persuade. Okay, so what are language devices? There are quite a few of them, and we're going to be looking just at a subset. These are very common ones, the ones that appear in most logical arguments or examples of persuasion. Rhetorical questions. Now, do you remember what a rhetorical question is? Later on in this program, we are going to be looking at some examples that actually have rhetorical questions. But just to jog your memory a little bit, this is a type of question that writers employ in their writing to get readers to think about something, or if it's a spoken discourse, the speaker may ask a question. The speaker is not expecting an answer from the audience, but he or she expects the listener or reader to think about the subject of the question. So that's what a rhetorical question is. Repetitions would be another language device that is used in argument. And that is self-explanatory. It means that the writer or speaker repeats a word, repeats a phrase, or repeats even a sentence. And of course, if something is repeated, it is reinforced, and that's usually the reason why the writer or speaker would repeat whatever is repeated. Hyperbole. Notice that that word is hyperbole and not hyperbole. Right. Now, what is hyperbole? It's just the technical term for exaggerations. I'm sure some of you have said, I can eat a cow or I can eat an elephant. What you have just said would be an exaggeration, because you cannot literally eat an elephant or a cow. You just want to exaggerate how hungry you are. And that's an example of hyperbole. Litotes. So litotes is quite the opposite of hyperbole. Whereas in a hyperbole, the writer or speaker exaggerates. In litotes, what is done is the person understates what the situation is. For instance, a contractor has the task of refurbishing a huge building. It's a delicate process. And somebody says, oh, that's not an easy task. And he responds, that's an understatement. Or what really he's saying is that's litotes, because it's such a huge task than to just simply say that wouldn't be an easy task is really an understatement compared to how mammoth the task is. Sarcasm. Sarcasm is usually intended to get the person or the institution that the sarcasm is directed at to appear foolish or insensitive. Let's say, for instance, your brother or a relative of yours has a bucket of chicken, right? And he knows that you would like to have some as well, and he eats all of it and leaves one piece for you, and you say to the person, have you left any for me? And the person says, I have one drumstick for you. And you say, that's very kind of you. Do you think it's very kind after the person had a whole bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken and you got just one drumstick? No. So you were being sarcastic by saying, that's very kind of you. So sarcasm really is the opposite of what is really meant, but the intention is specifically to make the person who is directed at seem foolish, insensitive, or in some way unkind. So bear that in mind, and remember, sarcasm also depends on the tone in which it is, the statement is uttered, because somebody may say something and it's not at all sarcastic. So the tone and the context of the utterance are very, very important. So when you're reading a passage, an argument, you have to pay attention to the context of the statement, the entire context, the entire passage, and what the writer is writing about before you decide whether a particular statement is an example of sarcasm or not. No. Irony is very similar to sarcasm. The writer may not necessarily mean to hurt the person the statement is directed at, but he's saying the opposite of what he means. So, for instance, it may be ironic that somebody who does not eat meat has a butcher store or a meat mart. Okay, so basically the person's personal practice contradicts what they are doing or how they are earning a living, so that would be ironic. Again, you have to pay attention to the context in which the statement is made before you can determine whether irony is being used or not. Paradox. I'm sure all of you have heard the statement, more haste, less speed. Now that's paradoxical. How is it that you can be going faster and have less speed? Paradoxical statements are statements that appear to be contradictions, but if you think about them, they basically are expressing a very profound truth, because when you are rushing, you tend to make mistakes, you might get into accidents and so on. So you end up taking a longer time to get to your destination or to complete your task. Hence, more haste, less speed. An opinion, on the other hand, differs from one individual to another. If people can differ in how they see or how they perceive a particular entity or a particular thing, then that's an opinion. Alliteration is another language device, and this language device is the one that writers use when they are writing sentences that begin with the words, sentences which have words beginning with the same consonant sound. So when you have consonant sounds coming in close succession, the same consonant sound coming in close succession in a sentence, then you have an example of alliteration. Assonance is the opposite of alliteration, whereas alliteration is based on the successive use of consonant sounds. Assonance is formed when the writer uses a series of vowel sounds in a sentence or two sentences close together in a discourse, and then you have assonance. Some writers define assonance in such a way that it also includes sounds in general and it's not restricted to vowel sounds. But generally, alliteration refers to the use of consonant sounds in close succession, whereas assonance refers to the use of vowel sounds in close succession. Oxymoron. Do you remember what an oxymoron is? If you remember, if you focus on the last part of this word, moron, it might help you to remember, because what happens is that the person using this device puts two opposite terms together, but they do so in order to make a point, to emphasize something. So a person may say, this is a bittersweet experience, and the term is used in order to emphasize aspects of the experience that they had or is going through. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is another language device that people who engage in argumentative discourse may make use of. Now, onomatopoeia is the use of words which sound like the meaning of the word. So, for instance, we will say there was a loud thud or a loud crash or the buzz of something. The very sound of buzz sounds like the meaning of the word buzz. And that's what onomatopoeia is all about. Rhyme, of course, would be the use of words that end in the same sound. So very simply, pat, rat. Those are rhyming words because of the at sound at the end of both of those words. And finally, we have metaphor. In fact, metaphor is not the final one. Metaphor. Do you remember what a metaphor is? A metaphor is a comparison between two things. But instead of making the comparison so glaring as saying you are like whatever, you can say you are an Adonis, or you are quite the Bob Marley, aren't you? So basically, I'm using a metaphor. I'm comparing the individual to the other word in the sentence. So for instance, I can say that somebody just barked a command. Now the use of that verb, barked, is metaphoric because it means that a comparison is being made between the individual and a particular animal, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
You're watching Homeschool 101.
Whenever we talk about metaphors, we must also talk about simile, because unlike metaphors, similes are very easy to identify, and you know why that is. Similes make use of the words like and as. So not each simile will have both or the other. So here's as brave as a lion. That's a simile. Notice the use of the word as in that statement. Now that we've looked at all of those language devices that are used to persuade, we're going to look at some techniques of argument or persuasion. The first is appeals to emotion. The person who is engaged in the discourse may appeal to the readers or the listeners a sense of fear. That's an emotion, their sense of pride, and so on. So that's one device that is used in persuasion. Another would be statistics. Statistics, of course, would be numerical data provided in a piece of argument, and that supports what the writer or speaker is talking about. Anecdotes. We also mentioned anecdotes as a language device, and of course you know that this is a brief story. It could be factual or it could be a made-up story, but the objective is to illustrate a point that the writer or speaker is making. Facts, of course, are facts, things that can be proven, and these are very important in arguments, logical arguments, where the objective is to provide reasons to convince the reader or speaker of the person's position, the person who is engaged in the discourse. Personal appeal. Now, if you are addressing somebody and you're making a personal appeal, you are going to use the pronoun you. So personal appeals usually depend on the use of the pronoun you. Contrast. People engaged in argumentative discourse contrast various things. They might contrast one idea with another idea. They might contrast one situation with another situation in order to advance an argument. So pay attention to the use of contrast, and you know those cue words that indicate contrast. Unlike this, on the other hand, however, on the contrary, all of those and many others are words and phrases that indicate the use of contrast. Repetitions. We already mentioned repetitions as a language device. It's also one of the techniques that are used as an argumentative technique. And repetitions, as I said already, are included in a piece of argument in order to emphasize a point, to reinforce a particular claim. Logical reasons. Statements that are logical appeal to our sense of reason. When you think about it, it makes sense. And in this case, there would be facts to justify what the writer is saying, or statistics are provided that support the position. And in those cases, you have examples of logical reasons. Finally, we have counter-arguments. Any good argument considers the opposing views and provides a reason why the opposing view is not accurate or sound. So these are the techniques of argument that writers generally use. Now we're going to move on to certain concepts that are very critical if you're going to be able to read and interpret an argumentative piece accurately. The connotation versus denotation. Now, when you do not know a word, you go to the dictionary for a meaning, don't you? Now, the meaning that you get in the dictionary, from the dictionary, is the denotation of the word, or what the word denotes. Connotation, on the other hand, is the feeling or impression that a person gets when that person hears or reads that word. And people who are engaged in argument make very good use of this concept of connotation and denotation in order to appeal to emotions, to create a particular mood in what they're writing, to advance the tone, etc. So, for example, there was no privacy at my school. There were so few students that everybody knew everybody else's business. The building itself was cramped as well, and the grounds were very limited. Just one small field and a tarred space for basketball. Okay, you see cramped is highlighted there. So why does the writer use cramped and not just small. Because even though cramped would indicate that the building was small, cramped has a particular connotation. It suggests claustrophobia, insufficient space. It's not cozy. Suppose the writer had used cozy. Now you would have had a very different connotation with the word cozy than what you get from the word cramped. So that's how writers make use of connotation versus denotation in their writing. Making inferences. Now this is a very critical skill that you must have when you are doing English, because as you read, reading comprehension depends on you understanding not only what the writer states explicitly, but also what is implied or what is implicit. Now, in order for you to make an inference, you have to first of all, you have to know that there's a difference between explicit statements and things that are implicit. So that's the first thing, is for you to be able to distinguish between what is explicit. That means it is stated right there. You're going to read it in the passage. On the other hand, you have ideas that are implicit, which means that it's not clearly expressed in the passage, but you can get that meaning nevertheless. It means, therefore, that you have to read between the lines. I'm sure you've heard that expression. Your teachers must have used it before. Read between the lines. And finally, you have to use your background knowledge, what you know about the world, what you know about various things, and what is actually stated in the passage, and combine the two in order to make an inference. Now, one strategy, one reading comprehension strategy that will help you to make inferences is to make use of context clues. Now, context clues are clues that the writer provides in the piece of writing, or the speaker provides in the speech, that would give you an indication of the meanings of words and phrases. So let's see how you go about making use of context clues. There's a three-step approach to identifying and using context clues. First of all, you have to pay attention to the sentence that the word occurs in. And not just that sentence, but you should also pay attention to the sentences that came before and the sentences that come after the sentence with a word that you are not sure about. So you're going to use that information, the information that you gathered from the context, as well as what you know, to form a preliminary definition. You relate that to your background knowledge and fit it into the passage to see whether it makes sense. So that's how you make use of context clues, taking this three-step approach. Pay attention to the sentence the word is in and surrounding sentences. Use the information in the context to form a preliminary definition of the word, and relate the definition that you come up with to your background. Does this make sense in terms of what I know about the world and how things function? And does it make sense in the context of this passage that I'm reading? So, let us apply that using the context. First, remember, we're looking at surrounding sentences, we're looking at preliminary definition, we're looking at background knowledge. Read with me. Online social networking enables individuals to connect with family and friends, play games, and express themselves. It is this last element that tends to get users of social networking tangled up. When teachers use a social networking to vent, they are no longer talking to close friends. They are potentially sharing their thoughts with a billion other people. In one case that went to court in the United States, a college senior was dismissed from her student teaching assignment because of her post on a social network site. In her post, she included negative comments about her supervisor. Now, we're going to use this passage making use of context clues to identify the meaning of the word vent. You see, it's highlighted there. Suppose you did not know the meaning of the word vent. Now let us see what are the clues that exist in the passage. First, individuals use social networking to connect with family and friends, play games, and express themselves. That's the first sentence. The writer goes on to say it is this last element, and what's the last element there? Express themselves, because you have to connect what is said in this sentence to what was said in the previous sentence. It is this last element that tends to get users of social networking tangled up. When teachers use social networking to vent, so you continue with how people use social networking to express themselves. So now we have vent being used as a substitute for expressing yourself. Are you following? Right. They are no longer talking to close friends. When teachers use social networking to vent, they are no longer talking to close friends. So clearly, venting has to do with talking. Let's see if there's another clue in this sentence. So we have express themselves, we have talking, but we know that they're no longer talking to friends. And an anecdote is given there about a young college student, and the final sentence says, in her post, she included negative comments about her supervisor. So when you're venting, you're not just talking to friends, you're not just expressing yourself, but you're expressing negative thoughts or making negative comments. So, if you did not know the meaning of the word vent, when you put all the clues together that appear in this passage, then you can come to the conclusion that the meaning of vent here would not be an opening to let out air, but then you can see the similarity, but specifically to express negative emotions or negative thoughts or make negative comments. Okay? So you see how we make use of the context in order to come to the meaning of the word vent. Let's move on. There are many different types of context clues, and I know that you have already learned about the different types of context clues, so we are going to recap these very, very quickly. So come along with me. First, you have explicit explanation or definitions. So the writer uses a word, but in the passage, in the discourse, an explicit, plain, straightforward definition is given. Here's an example. The solar system is made up of the sun and objects circling it. In the solar system, there are 8 planets and more than 60 moons. You know, of course, that Pluto is no longer a planet. So there are 8 planets and more than 60 moons. Thousands of small rocky lumps called asteroids also circle the sun. Now, what's an asteroid? Perhaps you never knew that word, but the writer has already given you the definition right there in the context, so you have an explicit definition. Small rocky lumps called asteroids. Okay, so you know explicitly from the passage what asteroids mean. Okay, so that's an example of a context clue that is explicit. You have an explicit explanation or definition. Let's go on to the second one. The second one is called an appositive word or phrase, appositives. Now, appositives are nouns or noun phrases that are put right next to the word or phrase that they refer to, because the two things have the same referent or identify the same individual. In this case, we have philanthropist, selfless people, help to relieve poverty around the world. Now that's quite a word. Suppose you had never heard the word philanthropist before, but then right next to it you have the appositive phrase, selfless people. So you get an understanding of who a philanthropist is. Now, in addition to the fact that you have selfless people, when you look at the sentence, help to relieve poverty around the world, and you know, of course, money and resources. Other forms of resources are what people use to relieve poverty. So clearly, these are people who use their money, they use their resources to help other people. And you would get the meaning of the word through the appositive phrase. The third would be synonyms, another example of context clue. Synonyms. Example, the fifth form students were overjoyed when they learned that they were returning to school. I hope that's true. They were even more ecstatic when they learned that their CSEC exams will not be online. Well, don't quote me on the last part of this passage. Now, if you have more ecstatic, you don't know the meaning of ecstatic, but the previous sentence says the fifth form students were overjoyed. Now you know the meaning of overjoyed. It means that they were full of joy. In the next sentence, you have another adjective with a comparative form, more ecstatic. So clearly, they were even more overjoyed. So you have a synonym of the word overjoyed in the form of ecstatic. You don't know the meaning of ecstatic, but you look for the synonym, and that would be overjoyed, and that gives you the meaning of the word ecstatic. Number 4, examples. In the context, the writer may also provide examples for things that might be unknown to the readers. So, for instance, you have anger, hatred, and fear can be used to one's advantage, but it is better to avoid these negative emotions. Now, suppose you did not know the meaning of the word emotions, but the context, the examples of different types of emotions, anger, hatred, fear, that gives you an idea of what the writer is talking about. So, that was our 4th context clue. Let's move on. Comparison and contrast. By contrasting an unknown word with a known word, the writer can determine the meaning of an unfamiliar word. For example, it is time that nationals invest in this country. We cannot continue to make foreigners reap all the benefits that can be gained from investing in industry. Now, suppose foreigner was a word you're not sure about, but you know the word national, and you know a national is somebody who belongs to the country. Okay, so when you make the contrast, then you know that a foreigner is somebody who comes from outside. That person does not belong within a country. And that is how you make use of comparison and contrast in context to determine the meaning of a word. Now we're going to go to one final clue before we actually examine some passages that are examples of what are likely to come in your CSEC examination. Finally, just use your experience. Just use your experience. So, after years of futile practice, the gymnast finally accepted that he would never be a gold medalist. And we know that at the Olympics, people practice for years, and the objective is to get better so that they can ultimately win a medal at the games. And most definitely, everybody aims for a gold medal. But if the statement says, after years of futile practice, the gymnast finally accepted that he would never be a gold medalist, what does that tell you? Is the practice effective? Is he being successful? Certainly not. So, even though you might not know the meaning of the word futile because of the context that it's in and your experience, what you know about people who are practicing for anything, you would come to the conclusion that futile means useless, ineffective. Is that clear? So we've covered 6 different types of context clues, and I want you to bear those in mind because they might be very useful to you. As you read, it's a strategy that you can use to determine what the writer means in a given passage. Critical reading for exam success involves your reading of the passage as well as your reading of the exam questions. So what do you do when you're reading the passage? First of all, you read the entire passage carefully. I know some students have this practice of going directly to the questions and then trying to determine the answer to the questions in the passage. Now, because of the nature of language, because of the nature of discourse, you are likely to find yourselves in problems if you do that. So, do not read the questions before you read the passage. Read the passage entirely. Make sure you understand the passage. Make use of context clues to help you understand the things that you do not understand initially. And then analyze the passage. Pay attention to the structure. And when I'm talking about the structure, you know, of course, I'm talking about the introductory paragraph. Pay attention to the paragraphs that develop the passage, the body paragraphs. Pay attention to the topic sentences. You know, those are usually, because not in every case, those are usually the first sentences in each paragraph. The first sentence of a paragraph is usually the topic sentence. So you pay attention to the structure. Introduction, body, conclusion. Pay attention to language devices, and we went through a number of language devices that writers use in developing arguments. Pay attention to argumentative techniques as well. Now, those are very important. That is going to determine what the writer is saying and how effective he's making his point. Identify the main ideas of each paragraph. Tap prior knowledge. That's very, very important. When you look at a passage, there's usually a title. Each passage will have a title. Pay attention to the title of the passage. And ask yourself, what do I know about this? What is the writer likely to be talking about even before you begin to read the passage? So, and as you read, try to think about what you know about the topic that is being discussed. And finally, another strategy that you can use in reading the passage is visualizing. As you read, visualize what you're reading about. And when you realize that you're not sure, you are lost, go back, reread. That's another strategy to use. Okay? Now the questions. You've dealt with the passage and now you're looking at the questions. Identify keywords in the questions as you read the questions. And read all the options before selecting your response, your answer. Because the first option may appear to be the answer, but it may be incorrect. So it's very important that you read all the options, because in multiple choice, and particularly in English, you're often required to give the best answer, because there may be two that you may consider to be, either one could be the answer. So pay attention very carefully to each option and choose the best response. So let's apply this to some actual passages. Let's start with this general one. We're going to analyze this passage very, very closely. Now, here's a passage, you're reading it. Why do we think a disabled person is unable to lead a normal life? And as we read, I want you to think of language devices as well as argumentative techniques that are being used. We're going to identify them, but I want you to think about them as we go through. So let's look at this passage. We're going to read it very quickly, and then we're going to analyze it. Why do you think a disabled person is unable to lead a normal life? For many of us, the word disabled conjures up a picture of an invalid confined to a wheelchair. someone who is a prisoner in his own home, someone who has no friends. It's a sad fact that when we meet someone who is disabled, we often turn away in embarrassment. These attitudes make it very hard for disabled people to contribute to society, and yet they do, against the odds. Take the case of Cheryl Ann, a young paraplegic. After battling bravely against her disability and the prejudice she encountered, she fulfilled her life's ambition, working as a fashion designer. Now we're going to analyze this passage very, very carefully. First of all, that first sentence, what is that? An example of. If you said rhetorical question, then you're absolutely correct. So this writer makes use of a rhetorical question. Next, you have confined to a wheelchair, someone who is a prisoner in his own home. It means that people who are disabled are being compared to prisoners, but there's no use of like or as there. So you have an example of metaphor. Next, we have someone who has no friends. Now, this is the second instance of the use of someone, because the previous sentence says someone who is a prisoner. Then you have again someone who. And if you have already said that's an example of repetition, then you're absolutely correct. Again, and yet they do, against the odds. This is an example of a short sentence. And all of these things are used to make this passage more emphatic, or to argue, advance the writer's position. You have an example of an individual's story, and that, you know, is an example of anecdote. Okay? There's one other example here, and it rests on the word after battling. Now remember, we said that a metaphor is an indirect comparison. Who in society usually battle? Now we expect our soldiers to battle for us. Okay, so that's an example of a metaphor. It's an indirect comparison between the person who is disabled and a soldier battling bravely. So this is how you go about analyzing a passage. Is that clear? You read the passage and you identify all the language devices and all the argumentative techniques that are in the passage in order to get to the writer's point and to understand the passage fully. And then you go to the exam questions. We have a few. We're going to run through these very, very quickly. The first one here, we have this passage, and this same passage we're going to use to look at some other questions. So let's read the passage very quickly. Nestled, first of all, you have to read the title of the passage. And the title says, Caribbean Jewel Beach Resort. Now, another thing that you should read, it's not here, but is the source of that passage. Usually the source is given at the bottom of the passage, so pay attention to that, because that's a big clue of the type of writing that it is, and also the writer's purpose and intended audience. So nestled among the grandeur of unspoiled Caribbean mountainside, the Caribbean Jewel Beach Resort is an idyllic, serene island retreat with spacious, luxuriously appointed rooms, each with its own dramatic view of the bay and the Caribbean Sea. An unmatched private atmosphere, coupled with St. Lucia's finest views of picturesque Rodney Bay, Pigeon Island, and neighboring Martinique, make this intimate setting one of the island's most sought-after destinations. The resort is in close proximity to the many leisure amenities St. Lucia has to offer: shops, restaurants, an international marina, and the island's best beach are all at the foot of the property. Now let us go through this very quickly. The word nestled in line 1 suggests something, so you have to determine what it suggests. And in this case, it does not suggest that the resort complements its environment. It does not suggest that the resort buildings are as majestic as the mountain. If you know the meaning of the word nestled, it means that it is protected by the landscape, mountains and trees. So when you come to C, you see the foliage and mountains surround the buildings of the resort. And you apply that to the passage, but you're not going to stop there. You're going to also read, the guests can consider themselves as safe as birds in a nest. Now that is particularly intended to throw candidates off by making them think of a nest because of the word nestled. But in this case, the answer is C. The foliage and mountains surround the buildings of the resort. Okay, let's go quickly to the second question. The use of the word unmatched, that is line 3. Okay, unmatched is now in line 1, 2, 3. Line 5, sorry, and unmatched private. Now if something is unmatched, it means that there's nothing that is equal to it. So that means that it is better than others. But remember, you should always read all the options. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to just identify the answers here, but in the exam, you make sure you read all the options before selecting your response. Next question. What does the Caribbean Jewel Beach Resort highlight as its best feature? Now notice the use of the word best. So you're looking for the best feature. So you read the options, and in this case, based on your reading of the passage, it would be beautiful scenery. So that's the answer to that question. Who is the most likely intended audience for this extract? And you pay attention to the use of words like private and intimate, and even coupled with the play of the word, and your answer would be couples, right? That's the answer to that question. Which of the following words in the extract best indicate that the resort's clientele are usually not nationals of St. Lucia? You have international marina, unspoiled Caribbean mountainside, idyllic, serene island retreat, and you're looking for 2. And in this case, the answer is 1 and 3 only. Okay, so that is the answer there, and we've come to the final question, which is the expression Caribbean Jewel is an example of which of these? Now, if you don't know what a metonymy and a synecdoche, what metonymy and synecdoche are, you should do some revision. But let me tell you very quickly, metonymy would be the example of us referring to the entire royalty by the crown. We say the crown, and we're really referring to the royal family or the Queen of England. Synecdoche, I can say I need 10 hands, which means I need 10 men to work on or 10 individuals to work on a particular task. But I'm using hands, a part of the whole, to refer to the whole. Oh, there's one final question. Visitors to the Caribbean Jewel Beach Resort are most likely to describe their experience as you have calm, relaxing, romantic, and stimulating. In this case, the answer is relaxing. So make sure you go through your self-check in preparation for your exam. Make sure you can list different forms of argumentative text, explain the key features of argumentative text, explain how to identify the writer's purpose and the intended audience of a piece of writing, explain how to use context to identify the meanings of words and expressions, describe 2 strategies for reading and interpreting argumentative text. These are the things that you should go into the examination armed with. So make sure you do your self-check. Prepare, 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 because you know if you fail to prepare, you must prepare to fail. So that has been another English A lesson. We hope to see you again on Homeschool 101. Bye.
You've been watching Homeschool 101, a partnership between ABS Television and the Ministry of Education. Thank you for viewing this lesson. Join us again next time.